night air hangs heavy over the Xochimilco canals, where the ancient waters reflect the silver moonlight in a distorted shimmer. Locals know better than to walk these paths alone after the sun dips below the horizon and the shadows lengthen. A thick fog rolls in from the water surface, obscuring the twisted roots of the ahuhuit trees that line the banks like silent sentinels. Silence reigns here, but it is a deceptive silence that hides a terrifying secret known to every child in Mexico. Deep within the mist, a sound begins to emerge that freezes the blood of anyone unfortunate enough to hear it. It is a long, drawn-out wail of pure agony that seems to carry the weight of centuries of sorrow. This terrifying sound signals the presence of a wandering spirit that has plagued the lands of Latin America for hundreds of years. She is known as La Llorona, or the Weeping Woman, and her legend is etched into the very soul of the continent. Parents warn their children that if they misbehave or stay out too late, she will come for them. She is not merely a story told to frighten young ones into obedience, but a spectral force that many claim to have witnessed with their own eyes. Her presence brings a coldness that seeps into the bones and a feeling of despair that can shatter the mind. The legend begins long ago, in the early years of New Spain. The story takes us back to a small rural village in the early 18th century, during the height of the Spanish colonial era. In this village lived a young woman named Maria, who was renowned throughout the region for her breathtaking beauty. Her hair was as dark as a raven wing, and her eyes sparked with a fire that captivated every man who looked upon her. Maria knew she was beautiful and carried herself with a pride that bordered on arrogance. She refused the advances of the local men from her village, believing that none of them were worthy of her attention. She spent her evenings strolling through the town square, waiting for a man who could match her ambition. One day, a handsome stranger rode into the village atop a spirited stallion that cost more than most families earned in a lifetime. He was a ranchero, a nobleman of pure Spanish blood who owned vast estates and carried himself with the confidence of a king. He wore a wide-brimmed sombrero and a tailored suit trimmed with silver buttons that caught the afternoon sun. When Maria saw him, she knew instantly that this was the man she had been waiting for. The nobleman was equally captivated by her stunning appearance and stopped his horse to greet her. He was charmed by her beauty and intrigued by her coy resistance to his initial advances. The courtship that followed was the talk of the village, as the nobleman showered Maria with gifts and serenades beneath her window. He brought her fine silks from overseas and jewelry crafted by the finest silversmiths in Mexico City. Despite the warnings of the village elders, who spoke of the differences in their social stations, Maria fell deeply in love. The nobleman seemed to return her affection with equal intensity, promising her a life of luxury and comfort. Eventually, he proposed marriage, and Maria accepted without hesitation, believing her fairy tale life was about to begin. Her father expressed concern, but Maria would hear none of it. For a time, their life together was indeed like a dream, and they were blessed with 2 beautiful sons. Maria devoted herself to the children and her husband, and the family seemed the picture of happiness. However, as the years passed, the nobleman began to grow restless with the domestic life, and his trips away from home became more frequent. He would disappear for weeks at a time, leaving Maria alone with the children in their large home. When he returned, he smelled of alcohol and cheap perfume, and his affection for Maria had clearly cooled. He began to speak of his desire to return to the high society of the city. The nobleman eventually stopped returning home altogether, leaving Maria and the children to fend for themselves for months on end. Rumors began to reach the village that he was courting a woman of his own wealthy class in the city. Maria refused to believe the gossip at first, clinging to the hope that her husband still loved her. But the bitterness began to grow in her heart like a poisonous weed. She looked at her children, and instead of seeing the fruit of her love, she began to see the face of the man who had abandoned her. Her once great beauty began to fade under the weight of grief and neglect. The final blow came on a warm afternoon when Maria was walking along the riverbank with her 2 young sons. A carriage approached them drawn by 4 magnificent horses and driven by a liveried servant. Inside the carriage sat the nobleman, laughing and embracing a young, elegant Spanish woman. He looked out the window and saw Maria and his children, but he did not stop or acknowledge them. He simply turned his face away and continued his conversation with his new bride. The realization struck Maria with the force of a physical blow. He had not just left her, he had erased her from his life completely. A blind and terrible rage took hold of Maria, a madness that eclipsed all reason and maternal instinct. She looked at the river flowing beside her, and then at the 2 innocent boys who stood watching the carriage disappear. In her distorted mind, the children were the only link binding her to the man who had humiliated her. Without a word, she seized the 2 boys and dragged them into the churning waters of the river. The children screamed and struggled against their mother, but her grip was like iron. She held their heads under the water, watching the bubbles rise until the struggling ceased entirely. As the bodies of her children floated downstream, the red haze of fury suddenly lifted from her mind. Maria stood waist deep in the cold water, gasping for breath, as the enormity of her actions crashed down upon her. She screamed their names and waded frantically after them, trying to pull them back from the current. But it was too late. The river had claimed them, and they were gone forever. She collapsed on the muddy bank, tearing at her clothes and hair, howling in a voice that did not sound human. Her grief was absolute, and bottomless a void that swallowed her soul. Maria spent the next few days wandering the riverbanks without food or sleep, searching for her lost children. Her white dress became torn and stained with mud, and her once beautiful face became gaunt and skeletal. She wailed into the night, calling out for her sons, until her voice was nothing but a raspy croak. Finally unable to bear the guilt and sorrow any longer, she was found dead by the river's edge. Some say she starved herself to death, while others claim she took her own life in the very same waters. The villagers buried her in a simple grave, but her spirit would not find rest. Legend says that when Maria reached the gates of the afterlife, she was asked about the whereabouts of her children. Because she could not explain what had happened to them, she was denied entry into paradise. She was cursed to return to the mortal realm and wander the earth for eternity until she found the souls of the sons she had murdered. And so she returned as a restless spirit, a phantom trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead. She is condemned to walk the waterways of the world, forever crying and searching for what can never be recovered. The first sightings of La Llorona began shortly after her death in the colonial period of New Spain. Guards patrolling the streets of Mexico City reported seeing a woman dressed in white walking through the mist. When they approached her to enforce the curfew, she would vanish into thin air, leaving behind a chill that terrified even the bravest soldiers. The reports became so frequent that a curfew bell was established warning citizens to stay indoors after nightfall. The sound of her weeping became a common omen of death and misfortune throughout the city. People bolted their doors and prayed the sound would pass them by. Historians and anthropologists suggest that the legend of La Llorona may have roots far deeper than the colonial era. Before the Spanish arrived the Aztec, people worshipped a goddess named Cihuacotl, who was known as the Snake Woman. It is recorded in the Florentine Codex that shortly before the arrival of the conquistadors, this goddess was heard weeping in the night. She reportedly cried out, "Oh, my children, we are about to go forever," anticipating the fall of the Aztec Empire. This ancient deity may have merged with the colonial tragedy to create the phantom we know today. As the centuries passed, the legend of the weeping woman spread northwards, traveling with the settlers into what is now the American Southwest. In the rugged terrain of Texas and New Mexico, the story took on new local details, but the core horror remained. Cowboys herding cattle near the Rio Grande would report hearing a woman crying in the distance. Their horses would become spooked and refuse to go near the water, often throwing their riders in a panic. The spirit was no longer confined to a single village, but seemed to haunt any body of moving water. One terrifying account comes from the late 19th century, involving a drunken man in the state of Arizona. The man was stumbling home late one night, along an irrigation canal known as an acequia when he saw a woman sitting on the bank. She was weeping into her hands, and her shoulders shook with violent sobs. Thinking she was a damsel in distress, the man approached her to offer assistance. He placed a hand on her shoulder and asked why she was crying alone in the dark. The figure stopped weeping and slowly turned to face him. When the woman lowered her hands, the man did not see the face of a beautiful woman, but the rotting visage of a horse, or in some versions, a bare skull. Her eyes burned with red hellfire, and she let out a shriek that shattered the silence of the desert night. The man sobered up instantly and ran for his life, not stopping, until he reached the safety of the local church. He was found the next morning shivering and babbling about the demon woman by the water. He never drank alcohol again and refused to ever go near the canals after dark. The danger of La Llorona is said to be greatest for children who resemble her own lost sons. Parents in Hispanic communities have used the legend for generations to keep their children away from dangerous waters. They tell their kids that if they play near the river alone, La Llorona will mistake them for her own children. She will snatch them up and drag them into the watery depths to drown them just as she did her own. This warning serves a practical purpose, but it is rooted in a genuine fear of the supernatural entity. In the 1950s, a group of young boys in San Antonio, Texas, had a brush with the legend that they would never forget. They were fishing in a creek famously associated with paranormal activity well past sunset. The air grew strangely still, and the crickets suddenly stopped chirping, creating an unnatural vacuum of sound. Downstream, they saw a glowing white fog moving against the direction of the wind. As it drew closer, the fog took the shape of a woman in a long, flowing gown. The boys froze in terror, unable to move or speak. The figure floated just above the surface of the water, her feet never touching the ground or the stream. As she passed them, the boys felt a wave of intense cold that made their teeth chatter uncontrollably. She was sobbing softly, a sound of utter despair that made them want to weep along with her. Then she stopped and turned her head slowly toward where they were hiding in the tall grass. For a moment, the weeping stopped and was replaced by a low growl. The spell broke, and the boys scrambled up the bank, leaving their fishing gear behind. They ran all the way home, not daring to look back, fearing that she was gliding right behind them. When they arrived home, one of the boys fell ill with a high fever that lasted for 3 days. His grandmother claimed he had suffered from susto, a spiritual illness caused by a sudden shock or fright. She performed a cleansing ritual with an egg and herbs to draw out the negative energy. The boy eventually recovered, but he retained a lifelong phobia of water and refused to sleep without a light on. The fishing gear was never retrieved. There are specific rules and omens associated with hearing the cry of La Llorona. Folklore states that if her wail sounds distant, it means she is actually very close to you. Conversely, if the sound is loud and nearby, she is actually far away, giving you a chance to escape. This auditory deception is one of her most dangerous weapons, luring victims into a false sense of security. She is a predator who uses confusion and fear to entrap those who cross her path. Many have walked directly into her arms thinking she was miles away. Another chilling aspect of the legend involves her knocking on the doors of houses near the water. It is said that she knocks 3 times, a mockery of the Holy Trinity. If someone is foolish enough to open the door, they will find nothing but a gust of cold wind. However, the act of opening the door invites misfortune and death into the household. Within a week, a member of that family may fall vaguely ill or suffer a fatal accident. Elders warn to never open the door after midnight unless you are certain of who is there. The appearance of La Llorona is often described as a woman in a white dress that appears damp or tattered. Some witnesses claim she wears a veil that obscures her face, while others say she has no face at all. Her hair is long and matted, often tangled with river weeds and mud. Her hands are described as elongated claws, capable of dragging a grown man into the depths. But it is her eyes that are the most consistent detail in the stories. They are said to be endless black pits or glowing red orbs that pierce the soul. In some versions of the story, particularly in Central America, she is not looking for her children, but seeking revenge on men. She appears as a beautiful woman to lure unfaithful husbands or men who are out late drinking. She entices them to follow her away from the safety of the town and into the wilderness. Once they are isolated, she reveals her true monstrous form and kills them. In this iteration, she serves as a punisher of moral corruption and a guardian of marital fidelity. The psychological impact of La Llorona on the culture of Latin America cannot be overstated. She represents the ultimate tragedy, the destruction of the family unit, and the violation of the maternal instinct. She is a symbol of guilt that can never be assuaged and a grief that never ends. Her story has been the subject of countless songs, poems, and films, each adding a new layer to the myth. But beneath the pop culture representations lies a primal fear that resonates with everyone: the fear of losing one's children and the fear of the unquiet dead. Skeptics argue that the sounds attributed to La Llorona are merely the cries of animals like cougars or foxes, wind blowing through the canyons, or the rustling of trees can also create eerie noises at night. Pareidolia, the tendency of the human brain to see patterns, leads people to see figures in the mist. However, these rational explanations do not account for the sheer number of identical reports across vast distances, nor do they explain the visceral physical reactions of terror that witnesses experience. There is a palpable energy that defies scientific explanation. Even in the modern-day sightings of the Weeping Woman continue to be reported by police officers and border patrol agents. In the desolate stretches of the borderlands, where the desert meets the river, strange things are seen on thermal cameras. Figures that do not emit heat signatures are observed wandering near the water. Agents have reported hearing womanly sobbing in areas where there are no footprints or signs of human activity. These hardened law enforcement officers often refuse to patrol certain sectors alone. One recent account from a suburb in Los Angeles involves a security guard working the graveyard shift at a construction site. The site was built near an old creek bed that had been paved over years prior. The guard reported seeing a woman in a white dress standing on a pile of lumber, weeping uncontrollably. When he shined his flashlight on her, she vanished instantly. The next day, a worker fell from that same location and was critically injured. The guard quit his job, immediately refusing to return to the site. The legend of La Llorona serves as a bridge between the indigenous past and the modern present. She is a reminder that the land holds memories and that tragedies of the past can leave a spiritual scar. Her story has survived the rise and fall of empires and the changing of borders. She is a constant in a world of flux, a reminder of the darkness that lies just outside the light of the campfire. As long as there are rivers and mothers and loss, she will continue to exist. Perhaps the most terrifying thought is that La Llorona is not bound by any single location. She can appear anywhere there is water, whether it is a mighty river or a small drainage ditch. She can manifest in the heart of a bustling city or in the deepest silence of the countryside. She is a universal boogeyman that transcends geography and language. Her sorrow is so great that it spills over into our reality, infecting the living with her despair. If you ever find yourself walking near a body of water late at night, listen closely to the wind. If you hear the rustling of a dress or the sound of soft weeping, do not stop to investigate. Do not look toward the water, and do not try to help the woman who sounds so lost and alone. Turn around and walk away as quickly as you can toward the safety of the light. For if you hear her cry, it means she has already seen you. The weeping woman continues her eternal vigil, wading through the black waters of time. She is searching for the children she can never find and seeking forgiveness she can never earn. Her wail is a warning to the living and a testament to the power of regret. She is out there right now in the darkness, waiting for the next curious soul to cross her path, and she will never stop weeping until the end of the world.